In 1952, a factory worker in Youngstown, Ohio, brought home $42 a week. He fed a wife and 4 children on that. His wife had a rule: nothing in this kitchen goes to waste. Not the potato skins, not the ham bone, not the grease in the pan. The dinner she made on that budget kept her family fed, healthy, and together for 30 years. Most of those dinners have completely disappeared from American tables. Number 18 on this list costs less than 40 cents to make and has more protein than most modern frozen meals. Number 7 was so common in the South that families stopped writing it down because everyone already knew. Number 3 was what you served when the week ran out of money before it ran out of days. Hit that subscribe button right now and come with me. I am Timothy, and this is American Food Memories. Let us count down the 25 old-school poor man dinners from the 1950s that disappeared. Number 25, creamed chipped beef on toast. The military called it something you cannot say on this channel. Families just called it supper. A small jar of dried salted beef shaved paper thin, simmered into a white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk, then poured over plain white toast. That was the whole dinner. The dried beef cost 29 cents a jar at the A&P in 1953. A bottle of milk and a loaf of bread added maybe another 20 cents. 4 people could eat for under 60 cents total. The sauce was creamy and salty and rich in a way that felt like real cooking even when the pantry was nearly empty. Families who had served in the war came home already knowing this dish. It traveled from mess halls into American kitchens quietly and without ceremony. By the 1960s, it started to fade. By the 1980s, most people under 40 had never seen it. The jar of chipped beef is still on grocery store shelves today. Almost nobody buys it. Number 24, fried bologna. A thick slice of bologna pressed into a hot skillet until the edges curled up and the center blistered dark and caramelized. That blister changed everything. It turned a cheap cold cut into something that smelled like it had been cooked with intention. Served on white bread with yellow mustard, or laid flat on a plate with mashed potatoes and green beans on the side, fried bologna was a full weeknight dinner in working-class homes from Pittsburgh to Memphis. A pound of bologna cost 29 cents in 1955. It fed a family of 4 for dinner and left enough for school lunches the next day. Children loved it. Fathers asked for it. Mothers made it without complaint because it was fast and it worked. The method never made it into cookbooks. It passed mother to daughter and neighbor to neighbor. Somewhere along the line, the middle class decided bologna was embarrassing. They were wrong. Number 23, pork and beans with hot dogs. Open 2 cans of Van Camp's pork and beans. Slice 4 hot dogs into coins. Stir them together in a pot and heat until everything was bubbling and the hot dogs had soaked up the sweet tomato sauce from the beans. That was dinner, not a side dish, dinner. The whole pot cost less than 50 cents in 1957. It went over white bread, or sometimes over a pile of white rice if the bread was already gone. Children ate it 3 nights in a row without protest because the sweetness of the beans and the snap of the hot dogs made it taste like something special. Church suppers in Georgia and Ohio served it in industrial-sized pots to hundreds of people and never once apologized for it. Today, food writers call it comfort food when they are feeling nostalgic and serve it in cast iron with artisan sausage at $14 a bowl. Your mother made it for 50 cents and did not need a cast iron pan. Number 22, macaroni and tomatoes. Not macaroni and cheese, not spaghetti with meat sauce, just elbow macaroni cooked in a pot, drained, then combined with a can of stewed tomatoes, little butter, salt and pepper, sometimes a pinch of sugar to balance the acid. That was it. The tomatoes coated every piece of pasta in a thin, bright, almost sweet sauce that was nothing like any restaurant dish. It was purely a home thing. A box of macaroni cost a dime in 1954. A can of stewed tomatoes cost 12 cents. The whole pot fed a family and reheated the next day even better than it started. Italian-American families in New Jersey made versions with fresh tomatoes and basil in summer. Families in rural Kentucky made it with canned tomatoes in January. The dish belonged to everyone and no one. Food historians rarely mention it. The people who grew up eating it never forgot it. Number 21, liver and onions. A pound of beef liver cost 19 cents in 1951 when ground beef cost 3 times that. Butchers practically gave it away. Mothers sliced it thin, dredged it in flour, and fried it hard in a cast-iron skillet with sliced onions that softened and sweetened as they cooked. The liver went dark at the edges, chewy and mineral-rich in a way that divided families sharply. Children either loved it or dreaded it. Fathers either demanded it or slid it quietly to the dog. But the ones who loved it understood something the doubters missed. This was one of the most nutritious meals on the table. Liver is packed with iron, vitamin B12, vitamin A, and folate. Doctors recommended it specifically for anemic children and tired mothers. In the 1950s, a family eating liver and onions twice a month was eating better than they knew. The dish faded when prosperity made cheap cuts embarrassing. The nutrition did not go anywhere. Number 20. Fried potatoes and onions. 3 or 4 potatoes, sliced thin. 1 onion, diced rough. A knob of bacon grease in the skillet. That combination, cooked slow over medium heat until the potatoes turned golden and the onions went translucent and sweet, was the backup dinner, the one mothers made when nothing else was planned. Served with a fried egg on top and a glass of milk, it was a complete meal. The potatoes cost a few cents a pound. The onion cost almost nothing. The bacon grease came free from the jar that sat on the back of every stove in America. This dish asked almost nothing of a cook. You sliced, you dropped, you stirred occasionally, and in 25 minutes the kitchen smelled like someone had been cooking all day. Appalachian families, Midwestern farm families, and immigrant families in every northern city all made versions of this. It had no single origin. Poverty invented it everywhere at once. Number 19. Salmon croquettes. A can of salmon, mashed with 2 crackers, crumbled fine, 1 egg, a little diced onion, and a pinch of pepper. Formed into small patties, fried in a skillet until golden on both sides, then served with a squeeze of lemon if you had one, or just plain white bread if you did not. A can of salmon cost 15 cents in 1956 and made 6 patties. 6 patties fed 4 people with a couple left for lunch. The soft bones and canned salmon dissolved into the mix and added calcium that nobody thought about because nobody talked about calcium yet. They just knew the patties held together well and tasted like something you would order in a diner. Catholic families in particular made this every Friday, stretching 1 can across an entire family. The croquette disappeared not because it stopped working, but because canned fish became associated with poverty at the exact moment Americans decided they were done being poor. Number 18. Cornbread and milk. This entry sounds like a side dish. It was not. In rural kitchens across the South and the Midwest in the 1950s, cornbread crumbled into a tall glass of cold buttermilk was a complete evening meal. You took leftover cornbread from supper the night before, crumbled it into a glass or a bowl, poured cold milk or buttermilk over the top until it soaked through, and ate it with a spoon. The cornbread softened into something almost porridge-like. The buttermilk added tang and richness. The whole thing was cool and filling and cost almost nothing. Farmers ate it after long days in the field because it required 0 cooking and 0 cleanup. Elderly people ate it because it required no chewing. Children ate it because it was sweet and soft and tasted like dessert even though it was not. A generation of grandmothers kept this as their last meal of the day until they passed. The habit went with them. Here is something the history of American food almost never says out loud. The 1950s were not a decade of abundance for everyone. The image, the chrome appliances, the television advertisements, the laughing families around tables piled with food, that was a story told about a specific slice of America. The factory worker in Youngstown did not live inside that story. The sharecropper in Mississippi did not. The widow in Chicago stretching a Social Security check across 30 days did not. For a large portion of American families in the 1950s, cooking meant solving the same equation every night. Maximum calories, minimum cost, 0 waste. The meals on this list were the solutions to that equation. They were not failed attempts at better food. They were the real food of real Americans, and the fact that we have forgotten most of them says more about our discomfort with that history than it does about the quality of the cooking. Number 17. Ham hock and navy bean soup. You bought the ham hock at the butcher counter for 25 cents. You soaked a pound of dried navy beans overnight. The next morning, everything went into a pot together with an onion, 2 carrots, and enough water to cover by 3 inches. Then you walked away. 3 hours later, the beans had turned creamy, and the broth had pulled every trace of smoky pork flavor from that bone until the liquid itself tasted like something you had been cooking for days. A ham hock cost almost nothing because most American shoppers did not know what to do with it. The navy beans cost 20 cents for a pound that fed a family of 4 for 2 full meals. The whole pot, start to finish, cost under 50 cents and produced one of the most deeply satisfying soups an American stove ever made. Women who made this did not measure anything. They had made it so many times that the recipe lived in their hands. Number 16. Hamburger gravy over mashed potatoes. A pound of the cheapest ground beef, browned in a skillet, the fat drained off. Then flour stirred into the drippings, milk poured in slowly, stirred until thick and smooth, the beef added back in, salted and peppered. That hamburger gravy was poured hot over a mound of mashed potatoes and placed in front of a family who ate every bite. This was the poor man's version of a roast dinner. The richness of the gravy and the creaminess of the potatoes together created a combination that stuck to your ribs and kept you warm until morning. A pound of the cheapest ground beef cost 39 cents in 1955. The potatoes cost pennies. The milk and flour cost almost nothing extra. The dish reheated perfectly, which meant one dinner stretched into 2. It required no skill, no special equipment, and no planning beyond remembering to thaw the meat. That is why it was everywhere. That is why it has vanished. Modern cooking decided easy was not worth respecting. Number 15. Chicken necks and rice. Chicken necks were the cut nobody wanted, which meant they cost almost nothing at the butcher counter, maybe 10 cents a pound. A mother would buy a pound or 2, brown them in a pot with a little oil, add an onion, cover everything with water, and let it simmer for an hour until the broth turned rich and golden and the small amount of meat on those bones loosened into the liquid. Then she added rice, covered the pot, and let the grains absorb every drop of that deep chicken flavor until they swelled into something almost impossible to describe to someone who has not eaten it. You picked the neck bones out, added salt, and served it in bowls. The rice carried the whole meal. It was filling and nourishing, and it tasted like effort, even though it cost less than 30 cents. Families in the rural South knew this dish by heart. It kept children fed on the weeks when nothing else was possible. Number 14. Egg noodles and butter. A bag of dried egg noodles, boiled until tender, drained, tossed in a pan with a generous pat of butter, salted heavily, and served in a bowl. That was dinner. Not a side dish, not a first course. The whole meal on Tuesday night when money was gone and the pantry was thin. A pound of egg noodles cost 15 cents in 1958. A stick of butter cost 18 cents. The two together fed a family and left enough for tomorrow's lunch. Some mothers added a handful of diced onions sautéed in the butter first. Some added a shake of black pepper and a sprinkle of dried parsley. Some added nothing at all because there was nothing to add. The dish tasted like warmth and simplicity in the absence of pretense. Eastern European immigrant families in Chicago and Cleveland and Detroit had eaten versions of this for generations. It required no recipe. It required only a pot, a burner, and the honest knowledge that a bowl of buttered noodles was better than going to bed hungry. Number 13. Tomato soup with crackers and cheese. A can of Campbell's tomato soup, thinned with 1 can of water, heated until steaming, poured into bowls, with a handful of saltine crackers and a slice of processed American cheese laid on top to melt. A can of soup cost 12 cents in 1953. A sleeve of saltines cost a nickel. The cheese cost another dime. Total dinner cost for a family of 4, under 40 cents. The cheese melted into the hot soup in ribbons that stretched when you pulled your spoon up. The crackers softened into the broth. The combination was greater than anything the individual ingredients had any right to produce. Campbell's sold 65 million cans of tomato soup per year at its peak in the mid-1950s, not as an appetizer and not as a side, as a meal. An entire generation grew up believing that a bowl of tomato soup with crackers and cheese was dinner, because in many American homes it was. Number 12. Pinto beans and skillet cornbread. A pound of dried pinto beans, soaked overnight, then simmered for 3 hours with a piece of salt, pork, and a whole onion until the broth turned thick and brown, and the beans turned so soft they barely held their shape. served in a bowl with a wedge of skillet cornbread, golden and slightly crisp on the bottom from the cast iron, used to soak up the bean pot liquor. This was Monday dinner in the rural South for 100 years without interruption. The beans cost 15 cents a pound, the salt pork cost almost nothing, the cornmeal for the bread cost pennies. The whole pot fed a family for 2 days. It was the most economical protein a grocery store offered and one of the most nourishing. Nutritionists who study traditional Southern food today are startled by how complete the diet was when beans and cornbread appeared together. The amino acids in the corn complement the ones in the beans. Your great-grandmother balanced a protein profile without knowing the term. She just knew what kept her family strong. Number 11. Vienna sausage stew. A can of Vienna sausages sliced into rounds, a diced potato, half an onion, chopped rough, a can of stewed tomatoes. Everything into one pot, covered with water, simmered until the potato was tender and the broth had thickened with the potato starch into something almost hearty. This was the emergency dinner, the one made from pantry staples when shopping was not possible and the refrigerator was empty. A can of Vienna sausages cost 19 cents in 1957 and sat on the shelf for months waiting to be needed. The tomatoes cost 12 cents. The potato came from the 1 0-pound bag that most families kept in the pantry as a matter of survival habit. The whole stew, assembled in 30 minutes from things that never needed refrigeration, fed 3 or 4 people and tasted like someone had planned it all along. Rural families across the country kept Vienna sausages stocked the way modern families keep batteries, for emergencies, for nights when nothing went right. Second pattern break. Here is what the food industry understood before most American families did. The meals on this list were cheap because they used ingredients that corporations could not mark up. Dried beans, cornmeal, canned tomatoes, egg noodles, beef liver, Vienna sausages. There was no prestige attached to these ingredients, which meant there was no premium price a company could charge. You could not build a national brand around pinto beans in the 1950s. You could not advertise a lifestyle with a bowl of cornbread and milk. So the food industry did what it always does when it cannot profit from simplicity. It invented complexity. It created products that replaced these meals with things that felt modern and convenient and vaguely aspirational. Hamburger Helper replaced hamburger gravy. Frozen TV dinners replaced the real skillet meals that took 20 minutes and cost half as much. The companies got rich, the families got processed food, and the original recipes, the ones that actually worked, slowly went silent in American kitchens. Number 10. Cabbage and noodles. Polish and Czech and Slovak families who settled in the mill towns of Pennsylvania and the factory cities of the Midwest brought this dish with them and never let it go. A small head of green cabbage, quartered and roughly chopped, a large onion sliced thin, both cooked down slow in butter in a wide skillet until the cabbage turned golden and soft and sweetly caramelized. Then a pot of egg noodles, cooked and drained, stirred directly into the cabbage and onion, salted heavily, served in a heap. A head of cabbage cost 10 cents in 1954. The noodles cost another 15 cents, the butter cost a few cents more. The total was under 30 cents for a meal that filled 4 people completely. The dish has a dozen names across Central Europe. In American kitchens, it usually had no name at all. It was just what you made on Thursdays when the week was getting long and the budget was getting short. Number 9. White bean soup with fatback. Not the elegant Tuscan version with olive oil and rosemary that restaurants charge $14 for now. The plain American version, a pound of dried white beans, soaked, simmered for 2 hours with a chunk of fatback and a bay leaf and an onion until the beans broke open and thickened the broth into something that looked pale and modest in the bowl but tasted deep and sustaining when you ate it. The fatback rendered slowly into the broth, coating every bean with a richness that plain water could never produce. A pound of fatback cost 10 cents in 1956. A pound of dried white beans cost 12 cents. 2 pounds of the cheapest ingredients at the store combined into a soup that a family of 4 ate for dinner and again the next day for lunch. Elderly people living alone in the 1950s made this on Mondays and ate from it all week. It asked almost nothing of the body to digest. It kept people going when going got difficult. Number 8. Fried salt pork with red-eye gravy and biscuits. Thick slices of cured salt pork, fried hard in a cast-iron skillet until the edges went dark and the fat rendered crisp. While the pan was still hot, a cup of black coffee poured in, the fond scraped up from the bottom, the liquid reduced into a thin, red-tinged gravy with a bitterness that cut through the salt of the pork and made the whole thing taste almost balanced. Served with biscuits made from scratch, baked that morning, split open to soak up the gravy. This was the Sunday night supper after the good Sunday dinner had already been eaten. The salt pork cost almost nothing because most American shoppers in the 1950s were already migrating away from cured pork toward fresh cuts. Families who still knew what to do with it ate well. The red-eye gravy is a Southern tradition that traces its roots back generations. It never made it into mainstream American cooking. It never needed to. The people who knew it already knew everything they needed. Number 7. Mustard greens and fatback. A bundle of fresh mustard greens cost a dime at a Southern market in the 1950s, and for that dime you got a meal that could heal a body that had been pushing too hard for too long. The greens went into a pot with a piece of fatback and enough water to cover, then simmered for an hour until the bitterness cooked out and the leaves turned silky and dark and the pot liquor at the bottom turned into something worth drinking straight from a cup. The fatback gave it smokiness and salt. The greens gave it iron and calcium and folate in quantities that a multivitamin still cannot fully replicate. African American families in the Deep South ate this as a primary dinner dish and had done so for generations. It was served with cornbread for the pot liquor. Nothing in the bowl went to waste. The nutrition in mustard greens is extraordinary. The people eating them in 1953 did not need a label to tell them they felt better after a bowl of greens than they did after almost anything else. Third pattern break. Here is something nobody talks about when they talk about the 1950s. Half the families in America were one medical bill away from not eating. The social safety net as we know it today barely existed. There was no food stamps program until 1964. There was no broad Medicare coverage until 1965. A family where the father got sick and missed 3 weeks of work did not have a system catching them. They had a pantry and a kitchen and whatever they knew how to do with what was in it. The women who cooked these meals were not just cooks. They were financial managers, nutritionists, and engineers solving a daily problem with no margin for error. When the money ran short, they did not panic. They opened the cabinet, looked at what was there, and made it work. They had been trained by their mothers, who had been trained by theirs. The chain of knowledge that kept American families alive in hard times ran through kitchens, not banks. When we stopped passing that knowledge down, we lost something that no convenience food ever replaced. Number 6. Chicken and rice casserole with cream of mushroom soup. 1 whole chicken cut into pieces, a cup of raw rice, 1 can of cream of mushroom soup, thinned with 1 can of water. Everything layered into a baking dish, covered tight with foil, and put in the oven at 325 degrees for 2 hours. You did not check it. You did not stir it. You went about your evening and came back to a dish where the rice had absorbed the chicken drippings and the cream of mushroom broth into something impossibly rich and unified, and the chicken had turned fall-apart tender. The dish required no browning, no sautéing, no technique of any kind. It required a casserole dish, an oven, and 2 hours. Mothers across the country put this in before their husbands came home from the second shift, and it was ready by the time the children were washed and at the table. Campbell's cream of mushroom soup became the most purchased canned soup in America in the late 1950s. Not for soup, for exactly this kind of cooking. 1 can, 1 dish, 1 dinner. Number 5. Potato soup with bread. 5 potatoes, peeled and diced, 1 onion, chopped. Both simmered in water until completely soft, then mashed roughly right in the pot so some pieces dissolved into the broth and some stayed in chunks. A cup of milk poured in, a pat of butter, salt and pepper. The whole pot turned thick and creamy without a drop of cream, served in deep bowls with white bread on the side to soak up the broth. A 5-pound bag of potatoes cost 29 cents in 1955. This was one of the cheapest dinners a family could assemble, and one of the most filling. The potatoes sat heavy in the stomach in the best possible way. They kept hungry children quiet through evening homework and early bedtime. For seniors in the 1950s with missing teeth or ill-fitting dentures, potato soup was not just cheap. It was one of the only dinners soft enough to eat without pain. Nobody talked about that out loud. They just kept making the soup. Number 4. Breaded pork chops with canned green beans. Thin pork chops pounded thinner with a glass or a mallet, dredged in seasoned flour, and fried in a skillet until golden and slightly crisp on both sides. Placed on a plate next to a pot of canned green beans, heated with a pat of butter and some salt, this was the special weeknight dinner. The one that meant something went right this week. Not that the family had money to spare, but that there was a little more room in the budget than usual. Thin pork chops cost 35 cents a pound in 1956. A can of green beans cost 10 cents. The dinner looked like real cooking. It smelled like real cooking. The children did not ask what was for dessert because they were too busy finishing what was on the plate. The thin cut was everything. It cooked fast, it stretched further than a thick chop, and when breaded, it looked generous on the plate even when the portion was modest. That was the art of it, making enough look like plenty. Number 3, bread pudding for supper. When the end of the week arrived and the grocery money was spent, there was often a loaf of bread going stale and a carton of eggs and a bottle of milk. That was enough. Stale bread torn into rough chunks, laid into a greased baking dish, a mixture of 2 eggs, 2 cups of milk, a few tablespoons of sugar, and a splash of vanilla poured over the top. Everything pressed down and left to soak for 20 minutes, then baked at 350 degrees until the top turned golden and the custard set firm. Bread pudding for supper. Not for dessert, for supper. Children who ate it did not feel like they had eaten a poor meal. They felt like they had eaten something warm and sweet and made with care. The fact that the ingredients cost almost nothing was invisible to them. It was the same bread pudding their grandmother made on Sunday. It tasted the same. The kitchen smelled the same. Nothing about it felt like a failure. Number 2, stretched Sunday chicken. A whole chicken was a significant purchase in the 1950s. Not a luxury exactly, but not an everyday item either. So when Sunday chicken appeared on the table, roasted golden in the oven with potatoes and onions beneath it, it was not the last time that chicken fed the family. It was the first time. Monday was chicken and vegetable soup made from the carcass and whatever vegetables were left. Tuesday was chicken salad sandwiches, the last scraps of white meat pulled and mixed with mayonnaise and a little celery. Wednesday, if anything remained, went into a pot of rice and became something close to a pilaf. 1 chicken, 4 meals. That was the arithmetic of a household that could not afford to treat food as something disposable. The woman who managed this arithmetic did it not because she read a meal planning guide or followed a blog. She did it because her mother had done it and her grandmother before that. The knowledge was as natural as breathing. Number 1, the everything pot soup. There was no recipe. There was never a recipe. On Friday nights, in homes all across America in the 1950s, a pot went on the stove, and whatever was left in the refrigerator went into it. The celery going soft, the carrots with wrinkled skin, the half onion wrapped in wax paper, the 2 potatoes that were starting to go, the piece of leftover pork chop, the chicken bones from Sunday, the tablespoon of tomato paste at the bottom of the can, covered with water, salted, simmered for an hour. By the time it was done, the kitchen smelled like a home that had been cooking all week. The soup was different every single Friday. It was never bad. You could not make it bad because the whole week of good cooking had gone into it. Every meal that came before contributed something. The fat from the pork, the gelatin from the chicken bones, the sweetness from the carrots. It was not a recipe, it was a philosophy. Nothing wasted, everything remembered. The same pot, every week, for as long as the family was together. The broth was different every time, and it always tasted like home. Here is my challenge for you this week. Make one of these. Just one. Not the wish sandwich from the Depression, not something that requires suffering, the potato soup, the salmon croquettes, the pinto beans and cornbread. Pick one, make it, sit down at the table, and eat it slow. Because these were not meals that people made because they did not know any better. They were meals made by people who understood something we have largely forgotten. That feeding a family with care and skill and very little money is not a failure, it is a kind of mastery. Leave a comment and tell me which one you are going to make. I want to know if the breaded pork chops still hold up. I want to know if anyone else's grandmother made the everything pot soup on Friday nights and whether she ever called it anything at all. Because these are not just forgotten dinners. They are proof that dignity does not require abundance. It only requires a pot, a burner, and the knowledge that the people at your table are worth the trouble of cooking for. I am Timothy. This is American Food Memories, and I will see you in the next one.